Okay, so we're looking today at assignment 1 of research methods, which is a mandatory unit in year 2. And this assignment will look at the ethical and legal issues associated with doing research in sport and exercise science. And as you can see from this sort of cartoon image on the front of the assignment brief, things can go wrong when you do experiments, especially if you haven't got control measures in place for safety and for the well-being of participants. And that is essentially what this assignment is about, how to conduct experiments and research without bringing any harm to any of the participants. So let's quickly look at the assignment brief. Here's the mark sheet. You guys fill in all this content. I will do the grading and give you feedback. There's the student review sheet, which you must check and use to check that your work is complete, and you must grade yourselves and complete the review here of how you did and how you found the assignment. And then of course your front cover going into all the information that I know you're familiar with, the assessment criteria. You must sign the learner's agreement and date it before you submit your work. The list of the tasks, the really important unit specification information, and then of course your task breakdowns. So again, looking at the unit spec, when collecting data for sports science research, you often go under the guidelines of the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail and what their code of conduct suggests in terms of appropriate behaviours, the importance of these ethical and legal issues, and for distinction, merit distinction, you look at what can happen to you should you not work ethically and legally. So here are the 3 criteria. P4 is pretty much describing the ethical and legal issues associated with researching. M2 and D2 then clump together to explain and analyse the implications for not working within those ethical and legal guidelines and what can happen to you if you don't do that. So your assignment, you are working as a trainee sports scientist for the British Gymnastics Regional Office. You've been asked to prepare and carry out several pieces of research on young female gymnasts, but you need to consider the ethical and legal issues associated with this research, and I've chosen this scenario for very specific ethical and legal reasons. The way you're going to be assessed and you need to provide or show your knowledge is by a videoed presentation. Now you might want to make a PowerPoint to help prompt you when you're explaining your information, but it must not be a script, and I'll talk about that. So the slides that you have on your presentation, if you use PowerPoint, which you don't have to, must just be prompts. So really importantly, you're not just reading a script. Ideally, maybe use images to prompt you, or a single or a couple of words, nothing too much, but do try to be creative and decorative as well, although that's less important. So task 1, describe the key ethical and legal issues associated with the work you're doing. We need to obviously understand what these 2 terms are before you can do that. Ethics basically is pretty much about what is right or wrong. It's what you might deem morals. So it's immoral to treat people in a certain way or bring harm to people. It's right and appropriate to treat them with respect and fairly and not bring any harm to them, given that this harm might be physical or emotional. And obviously you might understand legalities a little bit more and working within the law, not breaking the law. You must do some research into BASES, as I said, the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. Just look on their website, www.bases.org.uk, and specifically have a look at the code of conduct, which you can either scan and find here or look up this web link. But it's really important. It will give you a lot of help for this assignment. One important factor of doing a piece of research and making sure that you do have ethical and legal clearance is that most big research units, whether it's a university or some other kind of institute, will have an ethics committee. And if you're intending on doing some research, you have to complete an ethics clearance or project proposal form, which you then submit to the ethics committee, and they will read all the things you're intending to do and how you're intending to do it and why you're hoping to do it, and they will make decisions. They will give you the nod and let you go ahead with your research, or they will decline it, and they may give reasons. You might have to adjust your protocol, you might have to look again at how valuable and worthwhile it is, or reconsider how safe it is. So that's an important hoop to have to jump through as a researcher. So legal and ethical issues, basically the 4 C's. Competence, how skilled you are. Are you skilled at doing certain pieces of research or conducting certain experiments? You should never obviously take lactate measures if you've never done it before, if you don't have those skills. Your consent, informed consent from your participants is absolutely essential, so they need to know exactly what they're involved in, and they need to sign a document to give their consent to be part of the research. Confidentiality, obviously keeping things confidential. The Data Protection Act says that you've got to lock data away, that you should make the participants anonymous, shouldn't use their name, shouldn't publicise any data without their consent. And conduct, obviously general professionalism and consideration as a researcher for your participants is fundamental, really, in treating them right. So there were the sort of the issues associated with being ethical and legal. And then the second task is for you to produce information or thoughts in terms of what goes wrong if you do not behave appropriately. And very importantly down here, I want you to do this through scenarios that you are going to make up. So you're going to create situations which demonstrate the consequences of not working ethically and legally. And I've given you an example. Let's just look at the implications first of all. So, if you break the law, you could face prison sentences. You might harm somebody physically. You might harm somebody emotionally. There may be financial fines associated with something that you do. You will lose probably your professional credibility, which means that your research, nobody will support you in researching or fund you in researching in the future, and you'll probably lose your BASES accreditation. So if you fulfill certain criteria, you can be accredited by BASES, which is very high in terms of status in sports science research. And if you lose that, then it's not going to look too clever for you in your research future. So here's an example of a scenario. A sports science student was conducting some research and collecting data for their study, looking at the effects of exercise intensity and mood. One of the participants was struggling with the high intensity activity set by the researcher and was becoming increasingly distressed, eventually asking to stop. However, the researcher ignored the request and forced him to continue, being sarcastic and making derogatory comments about him for wanting to stop. Now, hopefully you can recognise that this really isn't ethical. The participant has every right to withdraw and stop participating at any point. They're allowed to ask to stop. The sarcastic comments, the being mean, the putting them down may cause emotional harm, and again is very unethical. So that's a really simple scenario which will illustrate emotional harm and bad conduct and professionalism from the researcher. So, just to recap, P4, describing the ethical and legal issues. It's asked for 2 or 2. Task 2, merit and distinction, explain and analyse the implications via the scenarios of not working ethically or legally.